Ms. Carano.
She's here.
Mr. Kerrigan.
He's here.
Mr. Curtis.
He's here.
Mr. Dortch. Mr. Farahi. Mr. Finland. Mr. Flynn. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Humke. Mr. Sullivan. Ms. Weber. Ms. Zadra.
Thank you very much. Let the record show we have a quorum present, and that takes us to the Pledge of Allegiance. May we ask retired Sheriff's Captain Jim Nadeau to lead us in the pledge.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, are there any requests to speak cards under public comment?
Got an agenda.
Oh. Well, we're not doing that now. I'm going to go in the agenda order. Sorry. I'm used to another entity. May we have an approval of the agenda?
Item K, you're going to move?
Move to approve.
Second.
Wait a second. Mr. Kerrigan.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was possible, because I can't be here for the whole meeting, to move 8, all the items in 8 right after 5. And that way they don't have to wait either. Is that all right with everybody? Because other than that, it's consent items.
Now, there was a request from our staff to move item K, the air races item, to right after the president's update. So if
I'd like to move all of 8 up there if I could.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Item M is our board appointment from the chamber, and Mr. Curtis is going to sit this full meeting. That appointment isn't effective till March 1st, so that I'm not sure if we can seat that member, or I guess we could probably do the appointment of, just so as understanding that Mr. Curtis will finish this meeting, and then that appointment would be effective March 1. So I think we'd be okay. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. And that's what we need electeds for. It's like a cop. Once in a while, you need an elected. Okay. So without objection, we'll do that. Move the items of 8 after 5. Thank you. That's a new motion, and we'll accept that motion in a second. Any discussion of that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that would take us to public comment.
He asked for public comment, but he's on the Reno air races, so I don't know if he wants to wait till that item or...
Mr. Mansour, you want to speak on the air races item, or do you want to speak in general public comment? General public comment, you can say anything you want, like you like the weather, or you like the air races or not. Under the specific items, you have to speak to the item. That's the difference. Okay. So now, okay, go ahead.
Good morning. I'm here to speak once again, to ask you once again to stop funding the Reno air races. This is a dying event. It needs to be left alone and let it die. The parents I've talked to all say there's no way that they would take their children out to an event where there's a chance that they could have a plane fly right into them and kill them. And therefore, the event is failing to rebuild its base of fans. One thing I noticed on this, a point I wanted to bring up is, if you want to enter the Ironman competition up there at Lake Tahoe, your entry fee will cost you $700. If you want to enter the Reno air races, your entry fee will cost you $600. Most of these planes are $3 million and more. $600 is less than the price of one tank of gas for any of these airplanes. One of the planes up there went recently had a $16 million restoration done on it. This is an event that needs to be funded not by RSCVA, but by the participants. I'm a race promoter myself, and one of the rules we always have with any type of race is the participants cover the cost of the insurance. Bottom line, that is the first rule of race promotion. And this is not happening with the Reno air races. $600 to enter a multi-million-dollar airplane is not fair. I want you guys to reconsider funding air races. If the event's going to die, just let it die, but dumping money at it is not going to make the event stay around. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? We will close initial public comment and move on to review and approval of the minutes. Any additions, corrections, deletions? Is there a motion? Thank you. There's a motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion of that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. That would take us to item 6, updates and reports. Mr. President.
Are we doing item 8?
Oh, after 5, I'm sorry. Yes, that was after 5. Okay. Item 8, items for board consent. I was reading the minutes, and I tried to speed this up last time, and that didn't work, so what do you want to do? Want to go down item by item?
8, they're going 8I. 8I.
Okay.
Consent, yeah.
So that's a vote for 8I.
That's not consent.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You did. I have in my head the Board of County Commissioners agenda, and this agenda is different, and then it's changed, and oh, yeah. Thanks. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Mr. Chair, did staff want us to do K first?
They did. So without objection, how about if we take K first? Is there a staff lead-off on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had to find the right paper in a different order. This board in December of 13 previously approved $100,000 to Reno Air Racing Association, broken out as $25,000 from the Partnership Funding Advisory Panel recommendation and $75,000 from the general fund to be paid in fiscal 14-15. Subsequent to that, RARA indicated that they had some pressing short-term operational costs and asked if we might pay more promptly at least a portion of our commitment to them. Upon reviewing our financial obligations and available funds, staff recommends that the payment schedule be accelerated, and the proposed payment schedule will be $50,000 paid in fiscal 13-14, and then the second $50,000 paid in fiscal 14-15. So basically shifting $25,000 from next fiscal year to this fiscal year to assist RARA in their funding, the cash flow needs.
Okay, seems pretty clear. Discussion?
Chairman,
Go ahead.
Chris, I'm extremely concerned that this incredibly important event for our community would go by the wayside if somebody is not in charge. A committee cannot run an event. And I want to make sure that we as a Convention and Visitor Authority are on top of it, working with these guys. I think if it was me as a CEO of this organization, I would be all over this issue, because this is a very, very important, again, event, and we don't have the luxury of playing around with an event that has been coming to this community for over 50 years this year and brings so much. And here we have had, how hard has it been to book another special event that has been successful beside the ones that we have had for many years? So we need to get hold of these guys, say, how are you going to run this event? How does a committee that every one of you is a full-time, have jobs and that, how are you going to run this? This is important for our community. What are you doing? They should pay to find the finest CEO anywhere in the country. We should pay, and I want to tell you, we, as one property, would be happy to supplement that salary or whatever package that they put together to come and run this event. We cannot lose another major event. Now we lost Safari in January, which after we see the January numbers, we know what the impact that had on this community. And now we have issue with air races that we absolutely cannot lose. We bring international tourism to this community. So this is my concern, is not paying them sooner or later or more or less, but who's running the show?
If I may, I have met privately with members of their board. We've expressed our concern that this can only be a temporary situation, that an executive director does need to be appointed. We agree that this is not something that is a long-term approach for a complex organization like this, and we have assurances that they realize that as well. So we've had those conversations, and we continue to meet with them, both in terms of supporting the group, but also making sure that our dollars are well spent.
Realizing is one thing, getting it done is another. The issue is getting it done. Is there a request out there looking for somebody to run that organization? Where is it? Where are they advertising it? Who are they going after?
We have not been advised that they are currently doing a search for a new executive director.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that this board sends a clear message to the organization that this is a very important event for our community, and if you are going to be participating and paying you these funds, that we need you to actively looking for a CEO or president, whatever the executive director, to run that organization, somebody who has a proven track record of getting a job done.
Mr. Chair,
Let's see if there's other discussion. Councilwoman Zadra.
I think I saw at least one of the board members come in. So there's representatives from that organization here this morning that could potentially respond to some of the very valid questions that have been proposed and share with us some of the direction that they're going.
Would you like to call upon such board member?
Whomever might be willing to step forward, please. Please.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Mike Major. I'm the chairman of the board, and I'm also acting for this year as the president, CEO of the organization. I do have over 10 years of board experience on the Reno Air Racing Authority. I've worked primarily in the operations field, but I've also worked with Dave and Mike, the previous Mike, on a lot of the financing, a lot of the special events. And I was also a member of the board that when we went to the NTSB, and I was one of the two presenters for the Reno Air Race Association then. I also wrote most of the technical changes and coordinated those with both the NTSB and the FAA to make sure that we were in compliance with the rules, regulations, and to some extent their wishes. I've worked with almost all of the people on the board very closely for multiple years. You may be aware that we have reorganized, which was done prior to the when Mike left the organization. We reorganized to a board of currently 7, which can expand to 9. We have Mary Beth is one of our vice chairmen. Mike McCabe is another vice chairman. Joey Scolari is on the board. Mark Bailey, We have two people from out of town, General Ron Fogelman, who I think most everybody knows was a previous Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and John Agather, who was a previous chairman, if you will, of what was at one time the Confederate Air Force, and he led the change from Confederate to Commemorative Air Force. That board is meeting weekly and has met weekly since the end of December. We have a charter to do governance and fundraising on that board. And we're very, very active in doing that. Mary Beth is leading the charge with the sponsorships. We've had wonderful response from the community. We have had a cash flow problem, and we've been low-key, I guess, from your perspective, because of the cash. We had to be able to get enough money to continue the staff and the event and the planning through the end of the first quarter. You folks, John, others were very kind at the casinos in terms of coming up with nearly $300,000 on supporting us for this year because of the losses that we've suffered since the 2011 accident. Those losses are almost entirely attributable to what I consider outrageous insurance costs that we've had to go through. We went from $300,000 for $100 million insurance for years up to $2.1 million for the same $100 million of insurance from 2011 to 2012. That's a jump of 700%. That was something that we could not absorb with the reserves that we had. We had to make some cuts. We did it based on personnel costs with the express confidence within the board that the board could take on the positions, work together, and be able to run this event efficiently, effectively, more economically, and guarantee that we can run the races for the next 50 years. Today and tomorrow we have the class presidents from the 6 race classes in to talk about some initiatives that we've got, to talk about the purse, to talk about how we need to partner between the race classes and the rah-rah staff to provide more marketing, to increase the participation of the community and of the racers in helping us with the PR activities. We have intentionally been not gotten into a lot of PR until we could understand that we will be able to conduct the races this year. We're still waiting for the 2014 insurance costs. We believe that they're going to be less than $1 million. If they are, we will have adequate funding to run the event. Our brokers promised us that we would know that by the end of February. I know it's really close to the end of February, but the informal communications with them is that we will be at or under $100 million. Once we have that, we will go full bore with the Glenn Group and with the Draper Associates with a massive campaign. Our ticket sales, I think I mentioned, are well ahead of what they were previously. We have basically impounded all of the ticket sales so we can protect our fan base. If we don't have a race, we don't want them to be hanging out. So we're not spending that money right now. We will as soon as we have the go-ahead. The same thing with the money that we've gotten from the stakeholders. We have not touched any of that money. We haven't asked for any of that money because we want to be certain that we can go forward with a successful and safe race.
Mr. Major, thank you very much. Let's see if there are any questions of the president. Mr. Curtis?
I want everyone to notice that I just pressed that button. It's my last day here. I'm finally trained.
That's the nature of on-the-job training.
That's right.
Only took 3
Who
years.
said they can't teach an old dog new tricks? If you could, I assume that the budgetary cuts and the reason Mike's not around is because of the financing.
That's correct.
If that's, if that's not correct, let me know. But I'm curious about the entry fee that was brought up earlier. That seems interesting to me, and I'm wondering what, and you're going to be talking to the various classes here shortly. What is their position on that, and what are your thoughts on that, and can you expound on that just a little bit more?
Well, I understand what the previous speaker said relative to entry costs covering the insurance. We are, unfortunately, the only event, air show, air race event in the United States that pays $100 million. We are in the top 1% of all insurance costs because of the races. If we ask our racers, and we usually have between the 6 classes somewhere around 100 racers, if we ask them to cover that $100 million, Reno wouldn't have an event. There's no way those guys can do it.
Just a couple of clarifications. First off, the insurance cost is not $100 million. The insurance coverage is $100 million.
Coverage is
And I think you said that you hope that the insurance cost is going to be more like $1 million.
at $1 million, I'm sorry.
We're
yes.
talking today about shifting $25,000 from next year's budget to this year's budget.
Correct.
And $25,000 is like a lot more reasonable than $100 million. So in terms of asking and talking to the pilots about the entry fee for this year to help cover the $25,000 that we're talking about, has there been discussion? And what are your thoughts on increasing the entry fee on a temporary basis, perhaps, gaining the support of the pilots associations, and improving the cash flow? Certainly they understand the situation, and they're not going to be going anywhere else to do a lot of racing.
That's correct. I think that's a good point, sir. We have not brought that up to them. We've been focused pretty much internally with our money to make sure that we can get through. I would be happy to put that on the agenda and cover that in discussions over the next 2 days.
Thank you. Mr. Farahi?
Chairman, I don't know how we can do what needs to be done, but the issue is here that an important event like this cannot be in a situation every year whether we're going to have it, we are not going to have it. By just having that doubt, a lot of people will not be booking to come to Reno because they don't know it's going to be there. Then they book something else. These things take years to build and make sure people know here we are 1st of March and we don't know whether we're going to have the event here this year or not. So I want to urge our CEO, Chris, to sit down, see whether there is any other way we as a community as a whole can help to make sure this event stays in our community. As we heard, this is such a unique global event. It's not only for our own community. And how are we going to bring another event like this once it dies and gone, is gone? I really feel that it is imperative we do whatever we can to help to make sure this event survives.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Commissioner Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I've been a resident in the Stead area for 31 years. And, you know, it's really interesting that we need to have this event. It is exactly as Mr. Farahi says, this event brings so many folks into this community internationally And we have to do this. It has to be a number one priority of the RSCVA to make sure that this event does not go away and that we make sure that it is intended for each and every year in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis.
I share some of the same frustrations that John has, and I think that I've been a strong supporter of the Reno Air Races throughout my tenure on the RSCVA board. But it feels like we're grasping at straws just a little bit. The request today to go ahead and shift $25,000 from next year's budget to this year's budget, I'm not necessarily opposed to that if we can find the money to do it. I just want to make sure it's going to work. And I'd like some sort of confidence or ongoing dialogue or whatever it may take to go ahead and see to it that any action that we take today is going to be successful in terms of accomplishing our communal goals. And maybe John's point with regard to leadership can be taken on from a private perspective. I hate to see the RSCVA jumping in other people's businesses, but how important is this shift to your overall operation? If the whole thing is hanging in the balance of this decision, I'm nervous. Give me some assurances here. Help me out.
We have every assurance from our brokers that we will be at $1 million. We have not touched any of the RSCVA money or any other money intentionally to allow us to go full speed ahead once we get the go-ahead. We, as a board, felt that was a prudent decision, both for the agencies that provided us help to get through this year and to show good faith with the folks such as yourselves, the RSCVA, the casinos, stakeholders, and our fans. We are convinced in our own minds that we have the funds available to go forward. We want to have the assurance from the brokers. We expect to receive that momentarily. You know, momentarily is, you never know when you're talking to the insurance guys. But in the very near future, and we will go on a blitz campaign to do what we need to do to have a successful year. We are planning to clear some money so we can start building a reserve, and we intend for this event to go on another 50 years. That's the desire of the board, that's the intent of the board, and that's what we're working for on a day-to-day basis. We believe that it's one of the most important events in the city also. It's an iconic event. We do have some challenges. Demographics are changing. The people who loved the World War II airplanes, unfortunately, I'm one of them, but you know, our age group is dying off. And that has caused us some amount of decrease in the people who come. We have got a couple initiatives this year that we think will start to turn around that demographic. A concert and or a pre-race party, a kickoff party, if you will, that will involve the community. It would be a fundraiser for us, but it's also a good PR event. We intend to hire another CEO. Financially, we cannot afford to do that this year. I can give you a little of my background. If it'll help, I don't know if it'll help, but I graduated from the Air Force Academy. I spent 23 years flying fighters in the United States Air Force. Got about 4,000 hours of fighter time. I was a vice wing commander and a wing commander. I left the Air Force after 23 years and went to work for Northrop in the aerospace industry. I was a program manager on several very large programs. I left Northrop and came here and immediately joined the Reno Air Race Association because it's something that I've always loved, and it's an event that I don't want to see go away, and nobody on the board wants to see it go away. But we have to do it with fiscal responsibility. And to pay the type of salary on top of everything else that we've got going on right now that we required both from our marketing lady and from Mr. Houghton would be irresponsible for us in this particular year. But our intent is to go forward. I am a one-year leader, if you will, and I've declared that to the board and to the association. I'm retired. I didn't need a full-time job, but I've got one and I'm getting no compensation. The board works, yes.
We thank you for your service to this country and your service to Rah-Rah. We do. Having said that, I think we have a motion. Should we try that? Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chairman, as a representative from the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority, we've had a number of discussions with Rah-Rah that go back to the time that the accident occurred out at Stead, and I think we're pretty well satisfied that Rah-Rah is making the appropriate moves to do what they need to do to get through the difficulty that has originated back at the time of the accident. And the Airport Authority has done some things which I consider to be a bit extraordinary to help and assist Rah-Rah in moving forward. And with that as background, I would like to make a motion to authorize staff to modify the payment schedule to Rah-Rah for the National Championship Air Races in conformance with item K.
Second. I think there is a motion and a second. Now, is there a discussion on the motion? Councilman Dorch.
Yeah, thank you, and this will be quick. I'm prepared to move forward with this today, and maybe to alleviate some of the concerns the valid concerns that have been brought up today, maybe we can ask them to come back in, say, 90 days with what their plan is moving forward and what their strategic plan is to make sure that the air races are a success, not just this year, but in years to follow.
Mr. Chairman.
All right.
I fully agree. I just want to make sure that we are involved, Chris, in doing whatever we can. Obviously, they are all volunteers. Thanks to all of you, Mayor, and the whole board. God bless you. You have done so much for this community. And we owe it to you to be there, to do whatever we can to support, to make sure that this event survives in this community.
So the seconder agrees. Does the movement agree to that addition, a report in 90 days?
I do.
All right. We've got a motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Thank you, sir. That would take us to go back to item I. Is that right? Now, is there a staff lead-off of what we're doing here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just set the stage. During our Marketing and Sales Committee and our Finance Committee meetings this past month, there was a discussion regarding taking on a new strategic planning process, how that might go about, who might be able to assist in that regard. And after a long conversation at both meetings, I was given direction to reach out to two of our local authorities on market research and related areas of expertise, M3 Planning through Erica Olson, their Chief Operating Officer, and Wells Gaming Research through Richard Wells, their President. I had previously met with both of them privately to discuss the possibility of them working with us in the future. And the direction that I was given and gave them was that this is to be a discussion of the best approach to take on tackling strategic planning, less so a proposal specifically for the RSCVA than to help our board better understand the recommended way to tackle the strategic planning process. So I invited both Ms. Olson and Mr. Wells to be here today. Told them they would have 20 to 30 minutes each to present their perspectives on the best way to do strategic planning for an organization such as ours. And many of you know both Mr. Wells and Ms. Olson and have worked with them on other projects. The Airport Authority recently worked with M3. We had Mr. Wells present to this group last year on the current state of gaming in the country and worldwide, and I know many of you in your other roles have worked with them as well. So local authorities, and hopefully we can help this board see what the options are ahead of us. Ms. Olson is going to go first and has a presentation to make to this group.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. As Mr. Baum said, the direction that you provided myself and Mr. Wells was to speak at a general level about the best practices and potential approach that might be taken in this organization. So as I was preparing for today, my intention was to share some thoughts and leave some ideas with the group that would help you craft what your go forward might look like. So I only have 5 slides. I won't take 20 minutes. We'll walk through a few high points and see where it leaves us. So here we go. If I can get this to work. So the flow of my thought process on this was just to share a few things around, we have this thing in business and organizations that we call strategic planning, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and that's really where we get tangled up. And that happens because we come to the process with our experience as business people, as elected officials, as citizens, as board members, and the way that planning needs to get done, or the way the strategy creation process needs to get done for those different types of organizations. And quite honestly, where an organization finds itself in its evolution is totally dependent on what's going on with that business, that government entity, that agency, whatever. So one of the most important things I think to share with you all, and a really key go forward, is being pretty tight on what the outcomes for such a process need to be for the RSCVA, and that's not going to happen today, and I would make a suggestion on how to get that done. But in the interest of form following function, the process needs to be crafted to get to the outcomes, not just applying a strat planning process because this is what you're supposed to do and the paces you're supposed to go through. So in the work that we do, none of the processes that we've ever ran are ever the same. There's certainly key components that are similar. But from the work with folks at the table, and you would know as well that we work in very different mediums and different ways, depending upon what the organization needs from the process. And you have a strat plan in place right now. The organization went through a planning process not too long ago as well. So it's important to kind of bring all those things forward and figure out, based on the investment potentially that the organization would make, what are we expecting to see as a result of that, really, truly. So that's kind of just a big framework to get our heads around, and it's a key piece to get started on any process like this. So the other thing that I wanted to share about sort of, again, these realities of planning are planning processes are never prescriptive. So I would never walk in here and say, here's what I think the process should be for the RSCVA without a pretty good deep dive around the perspectives of folks at this table, and maybe perspectives of people who aren't at this table about what the right process needs to be. And that goes back to my previous point about outcomes. And that's fairly obvious. Again, there's a framework that I'll share to get our heads around that, and you were provided a proposal that was based on some initial conversations about what it might look like. The nuances of it and the detail of it needs to happen from a deeper dive into, again, what the board wants to see, what the organization needs. So this is a reality as well. 40% of us love this, 40% could care less, and 20% hate it. And that's just the hard and cold facts of the matter, and those percentages ring true. The other thing I think about these kind of processes is they're obvious. They're kind of like motherhood and apple pie. It's hard to argue with doing a strategic plan. But again, back to that first point up there, what an organization needs as a strategic plan is very different, again, based on what we're trying to get done with what we call that. So anyhow, and that's sort of fun. This is another thing, too. I mean, we've all sat through painful retreats. and that happens because the process wasn't well designed. So, you know, again, back to not being prescriptive. Do we need a board retreat? I don't know. Can we do it differently? Probably. Do we want to get together and hang out for 2 days, 1 day, half a day, and dig into it? Maybe. Some boards do, some boards don't. So anyways, that goes back again to building it based on getting a deeper understanding of perspectives at the table. Another thing that's really important, and this is a big philosophy of mine, is we're not abdicating the planning process or the strategy creation process to an external entity. Whether it's myself or whoever you all choose to work with, but fundamentally the responsibility is to lead and manage the process, not create the strategy. So again, that's the job of everybody sitting at this table, and quite frankly, the rest of the voices that need to be brought in to the process. And the last thing that I want to just mention, and this is also where we get a little bit tangled up, is there's no such thing as strategy without being market focused, customer input, citizen input, whatever. And that's where processes get really long. And I know that a couple planning processes before, you know, there was a pretty extensive amount of stakeholder input. And again, finding the right balance for the organization in this part is super important. That needs to happen to the level and extent that it needs to happen is a discussion for the board. So, but anyways, there's no such thing as strategy without market information. And the other point that I didn't put up on the slide, but I wanted to share, is something else to just call out is that strategic planning is not an event, it's a business process. And we need to have the thing in order to make it a business process, but sometimes it just needs to be updated. Sometimes it needs to be started from scratch. Sometimes we don't need to go through a big, massive process to put forth what we think the direction of the organization should be. So just put that in the back of your minds, too. From if the board chooses to move forward, I would expect it to be a management tool, not just something we do every 3 years. So, and that's how it is in place right now, and it should continue to function that way. So, okay, so just kind of calling out a few things. And again, so what should we expect as leaders of organizations to get out of such a process? And I just was thinking about this a little bit, and I think these are pretty obvious, but again, the nuances are important, and what the board wants to see as the outcomes is, again, what would need to be vetted out. But a collective organizational agreement of the desired future state. So we miss creating the collective agreement when we don't go through some sort of process that gets all of our thoughts on the table. And how we do that doesn't necessarily have to be, again, through a board retreat or whatever, but there's something to be said about having a sort of a contract of agreement about what we're all trying to drive towards. So that's a pretty important piece. A single view of our short-term priorities and the resources aligned to get there. So again, we have a plan in place. Do we agree that those are all the right short-term priorities? That should be informed based on the first bullet point, certainly. But that resource alignment is huge. Of course, we're asking for the people and the money to be aligned to the direction that we're trying to drive. So again, obvious. At a 30,000-foot level, this is super straightforward. When it actually comes down to doing it, it's a little bit different. When we're reviewing the budgets and approving the budgets, for example, that's where that alignment should really come into play, and it might very well be there. But that's an expectation of a planning process. We're asking ourselves to be intentional about the long view. So that's the place, again, where we get a little tangled up, because how far out should we plan? We need to be proactive, but the world changes as soon as we print the document. So that goes back to it being a process, not an event. And then ultimately, we should expect to see accelerated results. And how we define results for the RSCVA, I'm not close enough to your business to know, but certainly know some of the goals and metrics you're trying to drive. But how we define results, we should expect to see those accelerated to our customers, to our citizens, et cetera. So. Okay, so again, just sharing some ideas with you to help us think about what do we need to do for the organization and what's going to make it work. So whenever I can share this slide, I do right now, because I think it's really great to talk about what makes great strategy. So timing, weight, and direction. And I'll just talk about those really briefly. So instead of putting up a definition about strategic planning, this is my definition of us thinking about what makes great strategy. So direction is really about where to play, how we win, and what we're not going to do. And that is the piece that makes the process go wide and deep. How wide and how deep do we have to go to feel comfortable about the direction that we're setting forth, about the decisions we're making on where to play and how we win? Weight, how much resources are we applying against that direction or those set of directions, and when are we doing that? And we're asking out of the process to be intentional about those decisions. So that's what makes great strategy. And what tends to happen in organizations that don't have a strat planning process that's tied to the budgeting process is the budgeting process is the strategy creation function. How we apply our resources is what we invest in, right? So we're flipping that around when we have a good strategy in place. So how do we do that? I only have this slide and another one. Defining what are the strategic issues we are trying to tackle as part of this process. So that's pretty important to frame up. We're not trying to take on the world. We start to answer those specific strategic issues or questions through buckets of information or perspectives and data. There's always internal information, of course, employees, board members, benchmarking of ourselves against other organizations. There's gathering external perspective. How wide and how deep the organization wants to go is, again, something that needs to be decided. There's, of course, external perspective there. And then there's what I call the strategy of record. We're an ongoing organization. We have a strategic plan in place right now. What needs to carry forward? What do we get done? Financial analysis, et cetera. But all of that rolls into some sort of analysis. We love using a SWOT, so what the heck? It rolls into some sort of synthesis to cull it down and say, based on all of this information, what are our strategic alternatives? What's our go forward? And developing a plan from that. So that's a pretty straightforward flow of a good strategic planning process. The nuances of the bottom two boxes are big. They certainly are. I have that little thing on the side there just to say one of the places that we get stuck sometimes is how are we making the strategic decisions about what our strategy is. One part of it's about external data. The other part of it is about the leaders and the tribal knowledge in the organization, and the combination of that is how we pick which alternatives to go after. And sometimes we get to that place in the process and we figure we don't have enough information to be confident about our decision making, and we got to go back out and get more data, which is why processes feel really lengthy sometimes. So that's why a good process starts with a clear definition of what we're trying to tackle. So that prevents the elongated processes that we've probably all been part of. Okay, so quickly, what might that process look like here? And this is just super high level. So the first phase is always planning the plan. I've said that already quite a few times this morning. So perspective from everybody, building out what the rest of the slide actually might look like, but here's a high level. Assessing the current position, so that is getting that perspective, the internal, external analysis piece. The length of time we take with that is up to the organization's decision about how wide and how deep we really need to go. Taking that information and developing the strategy from that, how we go about that, again, could do in committees, board retreats. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, but ultimately we've got to go from here's a bunch of information to the strategy creation, building the plan. Again, that can be done a little bit more quickly, how we want to do that as well. Staff meet, planning committees, executive staff, et cetera. And then, of course, super important is what are the expectations of how we're going to integrate it into the operations. And that, of course, means building out action plans, but then that's an ongoing function. So I went through that pretty quickly, but you have a big agenda. So unless there's any questions or if there's anything else I should cover, I will turn it over to Mr. Wells.
Why don't we hold questions until both presenters present and do questions at that time, okay?
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Chair, may I ask, so we have a little bit information about the background of each one of these presenters, what they have done in this area, with who they have done the work with. So we have again, in my mind, is always track record that clarifies what's going to happen in future. So if you could ask them to tell them about their background.
All right. That sounds like,
Would you like Erica to come back up and do that?
So we have a local company that's been in business for about 11 years. We specifically facilitate and manage strategic planning processes for all sorts of different organizations, government, nonprofit, for-profit. Yeah, that would be our buckets. And we have clients both locally and across the country. So locally, have worked with the City of Sparks. Currently working with the City of Sparks, Washoe County. We haven't worked with the City of Reno, actually. The Airport Authority. Also some private businesses here, too, that you might not necessarily know the name, so I won't go through that. Some name recognition across the country that we work with. We're currently facilitating and managing the Patagonia strat planning process, as well as the Boy Scouts at a national level. So those are just a few logos that you might recognize. We work in the capacity of sometimes just facilitating a meeting. So with the City of Sparks, we just facilitate the annual board retreat. For Washoe County, we've facilitated and managed the county level process all the way down into the departments. Sometimes we are running the process on an annual or multi-year basis, and sometimes it's just, meeting facilitation. So we've definitely made a practice around how to make strategic planning processes work for organizations, and that's what we do. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Richard Wells, Wells Gaming Research, and I have a little, bio about myself at the end of the presentation. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and go through the presentation and then cover that at the end. I was going to downplay that portion of it, but I salute most of what Erica has said. I think she, has a lot of the elements of the planning process right, and some of what we say will be very similar to what she has told you already. First of all, and this can't be emphasized too much, planning is the responsibility of management. You cannot hire a consultant to go do a plan for you. You can hire expertise to help you in the process, but it is absolutely the responsibility of management. If you look at the classical definition of what a manager is supposed to do, planning is usually at the top of the list, the first item. What's involved in planning, that involves a lot of things: analysis, setting objectives, strategies, schedules, budgets, forecasts, standards, a lot of other things. But that's clearly a manager's responsibility. It doesn't mean the CEO of this organization can go do that by himself, but he should be in charge of that process. The purpose of it and the benefits of doing it are to optimize limited resources. Lord knows you guys know how limited your resources are, and they've become more and more limited. And since the year 2000, it needs to be action-oriented, flexible. This organization has done 2 strategic plans that I'm aware of. They've attempted 2 others that apparently never got completed. The first one that was a good plan, 2007. It touched all the bases that should be touched in a strategic planning process. Unfortunately, it was finished just in time for the major recession or downturn in the economy, whatever you want to call it. So the goals that were set for that assumed that the economy would continue, onward and upward. That didn't happen. That plan apparently was not adjusted, or there was no effort to go back and say, hey, conditions have changed. What do we do about that? It needs to be flexible. It needs to be simple. You can get tangled up in your underwear in a lot of the planning processes. It needs to be very simple. It needs to be participative. And by that I mean the people who are going to have a role in implementing it or approving it need to participate in the process. You don't want a senior person, who's involved in helping implement it, to look at a strategic plan 6 months down the road and say, yeah, I think I have seen that before. They need to be involved in the process. And it needs to be, of course, put in writing. These are some of the key elements that go in a traditional strategic planning process. Erica touched on many of these, so I'm going to zip through these pretty quickly. The first one is a mission statement. What is a mission statement? It's very important. It's basically deciding jointly on what your purpose is. And it's critically important that the board and the senior staff agree on that. What is the mission of this organization, the reason for existence? That mission, as I understand it, I've been here and sort of involved on and off with the RSCVA since 1980. 1980, I was a senior executive with Harrah's, so I was involved from the standpoint of the casino industry. And I've seen the mission change over time. It used to be a fair and recreation board. It focused on, joint mission. Let's do some things for the community, like swimming pools and, a theater and a golf courses and things like that. That mission seems to have changed now, so it's focusing more on getting visitors to the Reno market rather than providing amenities for people who live here. So you need to agree on that mission, and it needs to be probably ongoing, enduring, but re-examined every year. In the two plans that I examined, you guys had a mission statement, and both of those mission statements are very similar. I've not, Erica, I was not involved in their planning process except to do a presentation to them on the gaming industry trends for this 2013 process. But these mission statements are very similar. I've highlighted in red the differences in them. In your planning process, you need to go re-examine this, fine-tune it. You don't need to, do a lot with it. It's probably fairly close to what it should be. Frankly, when you first develop this, you can spend hours and hours and hours on it. It's like getting a committee to write a poem. It's really tough. So it can be, you don't have to go through that agony in a retreat to, let's start from scratch on a mission statement. But you do need to re-examine it and say, is this really our purpose? This is a mission statement of a gaming corporation a long time ago that I was involved in developing. I think it's a very good one. It fit the times. That mission statement has now changed for that company, but that's an example. Vision statement. Sometimes plans have a vision statement in it. And the vision is really kind of sitting back and trying to visualize what this organization should be in the future, not being constrained by what it is now. What would you really like it to be in the future? And that is a useful process. You have one in your 2007 plan. It's fairly brief and concise, and it looks like a fairly good mission statement to me, or a vision statement. You have one in the 2013 plan, which is much longer. Some of it doesn't really fit the characteristics of a mission statement. Some of it is history. Some of it's explanation. There are some elements of it that do fit a mission or a vision statement, so this would be worth revisiting in your planning process. I would recommend that you do that. Philosophy is another thing. There may be some elements of philosophy that you want to zero in on and put in your mission statement. This is an example of a philosophy statement for a gaming corporation in the 1980s. I think it's a very good one. It's not necessary. The SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threat analysis is, in my view, the core of the process, the heart of the process. And in my 20-some years of directing strategic, operational, and other kinds of planning for large corporations, That's where we spent most of our time. And it involves the two elements that Erica mentioned, internal, external analysis. But this should be done for each of your lines of business. It shouldn't be done in a broad brush, for the RSCVA. In my view, you have several different lines of business. You are in the tourism business. You're in the convention business. You're in the bowling business, the events, concerts, entertainment business. You're in the livestock equestrian business. You're also in the golf business. One of the first things you should do is examine all of these and say, do these businesses really fit our mission? Over time, that mission has changed. You guys have gotten out of one golf course. Golf courses probably really don't fit your mission statement. So in this plan process, you should examine golf and all of those and say, do they really fit? The two RSCVA plans did address strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. The 2007 plan addressed them in a fair amount of detail, and they had them categorized by three different areas. The Reno Sparks region, it was just called regional analysis. Basically, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this region that we live in? And then sales and marketing and RSCVA facilities. The 2013 plan was a much more highly summarized and much briefer summary, but it addressed two categories, meetings and conventions and tourism, which are your two main lines of business. In the SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, threats, this is doing the internal portion of that analysis, and that's really looking within your own organization. Sometimes in one of the plans, the entire community was included in the strengths, the internal analysis. That may or may not be appropriate because the community, the city of Reno, city of Sparks, while they're all members of the board, may well be viewed as an external type factor to the RSCVA. So that could be internal, could be external. But you need to evaluate all of the products and classes, and that's basically the businesses you're in, and for each of those, what specific services are offered, what's the history on those, and you should look at at least a 5-year history, document it, detail it, analyze it, and I would recommend on some of that you go back much further than 5 years. You should go back to the peak year 2000, which was the peak year for gaming and hotel activity in this market. There has been a sea change since 2000, and I didn't see that addressed in any of the plans. That needs to be addressed, of that sea change and where we are and where that's likely to go. So some of that should go back much farther than 5 years in terms of analyzing history and trends. You go through this entire process and you result in strength and weakness analysis. That's internal to the organization and possibly the community, depending on how you want to define it. We then go to the external analysis, and this, frankly, is the one that requires the most time and research. It's the area where you may have a lot of information now, but you will have the least information, and you will need to get a lot of additional information. You may need some consulting budget to go get information from some experts. For instance, if you wanted to understand the convention business thoroughly in the Western United States, you might want to go hire someone who is a real expert in that, who has a lot of data, maybe somebody like a Price Waterhouse who actually is in the business of tracking that, by facility, to do a very thorough analysis for you. Before you do that, you want to really do an inventory of all the data you do have, because you will have an enormous amount of data already. You want to analyze that, see what you know, what you don't know, and what you need to know figure that out and go get the information that you need. So this area, this entire area is extremely important. Analyzing those elements of it that are relevant. Competition, as an example. You know, if I were doing your plan or helping you with it, or if it were my responsibility, I would want to know everything there is to know about every one of our competitors. And, and all of the classes of convention and meeting business, where it's going, who's getting it, why are they getting it, strengths and weaknesses of competitors versus us, and so forth. So it would be, a very detailed type analysis. And the end of that analysis would result in a summary of opportunities and threats. Opportunities, you would focus on trying to improve your position going forward. The next element in the process is called key result areas. In the 1950s, Peter Drucker wrote a book called Effective Management. And the elements that he identified in that book as those that are critical for success for a business have been a foundation of strategic planning since that time, and they still are. And the first for a for-profit business is one called profitability. This is not a for-profit organization, but I would encourage you to find your key result area that is comparable to profitability in the private sector and figure out what that is. There is one, and you need to figure that out. Customer satisfaction is extremely high on the list. And that typically is obtained through survey data of existing customers, prospective customers, lost customers. Why did you lose customers? Innovation is extremely important. Resources. Resources is very important to you guys. You have a lot of resources. You have a lot of facilities. You have a ticking time bomb in deferred maintenance. That has been addressed in the last those two plans, 2007 and 13. It was addressed in both of those, but as far as I can tell, nothing has been done about it. So your ticking time bomb is still there. You have millions of dollars of deferred maintenance on facilities. So that really needs to be addressed in your plan. And there are other elements here that you go through. Your 2007 plan identified planks. They were called planks. They are very similar to KRAs, key result areas. I would sign off on them as being certainly adequate to meet the definition of KRAs. The first is generate hotel room nights. That is probably the number one key result area. The second is to increase traveler and group visits to the Reno market. The third is special events. And you just spent quite a bit of time talking about one of those special events here this morning. The fourth is facilities, efficiently managed. And the fifth is where the maintenance of those facilities was addressed in that plan. And hotel average daily rate, which is low in this market compared to almost any other comparable markets. And frankly, it's not something you can wave a magic wand and increase your rates. It's a supply and demand issue. If you have more supply than you do demand, then rates are going to be low, and everybody's going to be fighting for occupancy. And so this organization can help build demand and improve rates in that manner. And there are other elements that could be done by this organization. The 2013 plan did not identify what I would call KRAs. It went straight to strategies. Some of those strategies are marketing strategies and don't really have a KRA that's easily identifiable. Some do. Number two, convention and meeting sales is definitely, that's one that was in the earlier plan. fits the definition of a key result area. So in your planning process, you already have these two plans. So you should make the best use of what you have in examining the key result areas and saying, what are they? Let's go look at what we've done in the past. Is that a good one? Should we keep that one? Should we throw this one out? Should we fine-tune this one? And then once you have identified your key result areas, you go to the next step. Be sure you know how to measure them. Basically, if you can't count it, it does not count. So you need to find a way to measure it. So find a way to measure it. These are some examples of how you might measure some goals set in those key result areas. Then you need to set objectives, one or more objectives for each of those key result areas. There's a key difference between a continuing objective, which is more of a strategic objective, and a specific objective. A continuing objective might read something like the one up there: achieve convention center occupancy equal to or greater than comparable industry average for the Western U.S. That's a strategic continuing objective. A specific objective would be, gee, in the next fiscal year, we want to achieve a 52% occupancy. In the convention business, the occupancy levels generally go between 40 and 60%. You're never going to be probably above, that level. So that would be an example of a continuing objective. And then you develop strategies. Some people in the 2007 plan sort of skip some of this intermediate stuff and jump straight to strategies. But if you don't have a clearly defined objective in an important key result area, then you may not be working on the right strategy. So you really need to focus it. And what is a strategy? It's a broad course of action selected from among alternatives to help reach your objective. And I have put in red, selected from among alternatives. That implies that you have actually done a lot of homework and identified alternatives and evaluated them and determined the best prospects for going forward. And the strategies then need to be documented with action plans. Once you develop a strategy, then what are your action plans or programs or strategic initiatives, whatever you want to call them, for achieving those plans? And the planning process, and Erica was right on target with this, it needs to be integrated. It needs to be an integrated process to your annual planning process, to your budgets. It needs to be a fully integrated process so that the first year of your annual plan is the same number that is in your budget for the coming year. But you don't do a 5-year plan, run a string of numbers out for 5 years and never update it. So in the second year, you need to update all that for the new circumstances, new strategies, whatever has happened, and you'll have a new set of 5-year projections or 3-year projections. And the board needs to buy off on those. It needs to be done by the planning senior management and staff, and it needs to be a way of coming to full agreement with the board so that the board and the staff are speaking out of the same chapter in the same book, and you're moving forward, with what needs to be done. I'm going to depart. What I've just described and what Erica described is what I would call the traditional planning process. There are some new techniques in planning, and they typically fall in the category of innovation. How do you really do things better? And there was a book written, and I would recommend this for your reading list if you haven't already read it. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. It was written in 2005 by 2 professors at the INSEAD graduate school in France. INSEAD is a very prestigious business graduate school. It has affiliations with Harvard and Stanford. They have an institute for doing blue ocean strategy. Professional planners, others, corporate people can go there and study the process and get certified in that process. I'm not an expert in blue ocean strategy, and I have not been certified in it. But I would highly recommend that you go through this process on at least one of your lines of business, probably your highest priority line. It might be the convention business or tourism. And the characteristics of the blue ocean is just a sort of an acronym for, I think of it as sharks in the water, you know, and there are so many sharks that all the game fish have been eaten and the water is bloody. So the sharks have to go find a blue ocean where there aren't so many sharks and there are more fish. And that's, you guys are swimming in a red ocean of competition with all of your lines of business. What this blue ocean strategy approach does is it tries to help find some new elements of additional market that are uncontested market space. And they won't be uncontested forever because there will be imitators as soon as, you know, you find something really good to do in this area. The people who wrote this book have been spending the last 10 years or so developing all kinds of tools to help go through this process. When you first look at them, they can be really intimidating, and you don't generally need to use all of them. But using a couple of these with an expert to help go through the process might, in fact, be really productive. Here are some examples of blue ocean strategy. The people who wrote this book studied 150 businesses in 30 different countries since about 1800. And what they did is, like a lot of academics, they tried to identify the common characteristics of what really made these businesses successful. And they identified what they call the blue ocean, and there are a lot of different elements of that. Model T Ford is one. So you had people traveling in a four-wheel vehicle. You know, when the Model T was invented, you had the internal combustion engine, which had been around since the 1800s, and somebody came up with a bright idea, gee, why don't we put those two together, and you've got the Model T Ford and an entirely new industry. Cirque du Soleil is another one. They took elements of the circus, which didn't cost a lot of money. They left out the elephants and all of the animals and all the things that required a separate venue, like a tent, you know, to put it on. They combined that with theater. Both of those elements were already here. You had circuses and you had theater. They simply took those two and made a combination of them. Now they can put on a circus, quote, theater type show anywhere in the world that there's a good stage, you know, good place, a good venue for it. Southwest Airlines, their focus was, gee, we want to get you on a short trip from Reno to Las Vegas or Reno to Denver cheaper than you can drive. So they opened a whole new market. You know, people who were previously driving said, hey, why do we want to drive when we can fly on Southwest? So it's taking elements of an existing market and business and combining them. NetJets is another, and so are the others, which I won't go through. Going through the process doesn't mean you're going to come up with a magic solution, so I don't want to oversell it. But I would highly recommend it. I mentioned I'm not an expert in that process. I know someone who is an expert that I would recommend. There may be others who could also, you know, fill in that role. And finally, here are my recommendations for going forward. Number one is establish a planning committee of the board of directors. I would not recommend that it be the entire board. I would recommend that it be a small but representative committee that is made up of people who have a keen interest Erica mentioned 40% love it, 40% hate it, or are indifferent, and 20%, hate it. So try to find the 40% who have a really good, strong interest in it and are going to really contribute to it, and get yourself a strategic planning committee of the board. Now, this committee shouldn't do all the planning. This committee should direct the planning effort. They should not do all the planning. Then I call it subcommittees. I really don't like committees, and so I probably would change that to teams, to establish separate planning teams for each line of business. So on the convention side, there will be several key members of management and staff who will probably be on one or all of these teams, planning teams. But you'll probably have other people on it. You might want to have people from the other hotel, casino facilities who have big convention facilities. Maybe they should be on that team. There may be other people outside this organization who should be on that team. Then, if you're really going to undertake an effort that is ongoing, you're going to more than likely need staff support for it. In discussing and meeting with some of the key management here about the 2007 plan, it was a good plan, a very thorough plan, had good objectives. It only had one fault: it was completed in time for the recession. And then, it just was not achievable after, because of the recession. But it took an enormous amount of time of the staff and management to put that together. And that needs to be streamlined, and you're going to need to have staff support. In the organizations that I've been involved in, they were larger, and I was a senior VP of planning, and my titles were VP of budgeting, VP of planning and analysis, and I had staff to help do a lot of stuff. And it was a 24/7, 365-day job. It wasn't once-a-year process, but we were analyzing alternatives and projects and what have you year-round. So when it came time for the budgeting process, we'd already evaluated a lot of things that we knew appeared to be feasible and probably should go in the plan. So I would recommend you consider staff. Your organization is so small, you probably don't need a separate department for that, but you probably need a senior planner who is maybe in the finance department to really help direct and coordinate and do a lot of analysis or direct that effort. I would recommend strongly that you go through this blue ocean process with somebody who is an expert in it on one of your lines of business, just as a major experiment to see if it really does anything for you. And then go through the standard process, which both Erica and I have described, to complete the business plan and tie it into the annual planning process. And then at the end of this is a little bit of my history. 5 years as a senior financial analyst, major oil company, Conoco. This was a long time ago in a place far away, but from day one I worked on 5-year plans. Conoco was doing 5-year plans in the 1950s. The time horizon for projects in an oil company is much longer than 5 years. The project time horizons are 10 to 20 years. And we did 5-year plans, financial projections, but feasibility on everything we did. I was a VP of planning for a major bank, a $1 billion bank, for 6 years, doing budgeting, strategic planning, financial studies, a lot of other stuff. VP of planning and analysis in a major hotel company, Holiday Inns, 1,700 hotels worldwide. We did the first 5-year plan that a company had ever done, and subsequent updates every year thereafter. The company quadrupled in earnings during that process. I contributed to that. The planning process and staff don't accomplish those kind of things. We had excellent leadership, top leadership. CEO that I worked for was a superb leader, and I would give him more credit, than myself or probably anyone else, because he led the process. But I did contribute to it, and I was really pleased to be a part of it. Then Senior Vice President of Planning and Administration for a major gaming company, Harrah's, 6 years. Again, I did the first strategic plan at Harrah's, and managed the planning process thereafter. More recently, I have been running Wells Gaming Research for the last 24 years. I have not been doing pure strategic plans. I've been working in the area of planning that involves research and analysis, focusing primarily on the gaming and hospitality industry. And we've had our hands full doing projects all over the United States. Just finished one for the Navajo Nation, where they asked us to come in and do a critical assessment of all of their casino properties and 5-year projections going forward for all of them. So that's what we've been doing recently. So that's my story. I appreciate your time, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you very much. The council pointed out to me that we have 2 items. We have I, which is a non-action item, straight presentations, and then J, which is moving toward some decision. If that helps folks, council is going to, I believe, is going to recommend that we put out an RFQ, request for qualifications, of these 2 providers and perhaps others. So that is, those are the sideboards of what we're trying to do. Mr. Farahi.
Mr. Chair, I would like to recommend to our board that, frankly, this needs to be taken, the leader of this effort should be the CEO. This is what I do in our corporation. As we heard from Richard, companies that are successful is the CEOs who really take charge, and because this is what makes a successful organization. People sometimes ask me, how come you guys are so successful? And, well, we have a goal, we work on it, we have a strategic plan. I hold our team responsible. Each department, every director is responsible to deliver on those goals. And if we don't, I want to know why. They have to have a reason, explain to you. So really, it is, I want to say this, that it is not going to be a board that is going to run this effort. It is the CEO's responsibility to deliver the goods. The board needs to understand what needs to be done. Like I go to our board, we're a publicly traded company. I have 3 outside directors that are much tougher than I, who question me and that I have to go to report to. And they ask me, what's your plan? How? Based on what? What kind of team you want to put together? Who's going to drive it? For example, at our property, we have somebody who's in charge of our strategic plans and exactly what Richard talked about, like Harris had, that looks at opportunities, things changing. Like we know in the convention business today, every city has built these Taj Mahals. There's more facilities in this country that there could ever be business to fill these facilities up. But we got to know, invest in the United States, where do we stand? If we have all these destinations have these facilities, how are we going to separate ourselves? What is unique about us? And based on that uniqueness, where should we be targeting our efforts? And who do we need to be able to accomplish that? Do we have the right team to accomplish that objective? So this is what I would like to say. If not, this board is going to get frustrated. I think I had the pleasure of being here on 2007 on this board when we did the 2007 strategic plan. As you heard from Richard, I think it's a solid plan. Things have changed on that, but I think 2007 plan was exceptionally well done, and we spent a lot of time. It's just that we walked away from it. And, people on this board change, and people leave, they forget there was a plan. So we already have the base to work on and start putting a team together to update it and put an action plan in place and measuring tools to get the job done.
Thank you. Other discussion? Questions of the presenters? Mr. Hawkins?
I had a question. That was a great report. Thank you. Is there an electronic version that we can get of that report?
Of
Email?
the PowerPoint?
Yeah, just the presentation. It's like about 38 pages.
How much you charge it to? No, I'm joking.
Let us, see no additional discussion, let's go to council for some description under item J of what he
Mr. Chair,
was.
I do have one comment, or maybe we need some further discussion for that. We did hear the recommendation from Mr. Wells that there be a planning committee, even though he didn't like the strategic planning process committee. And maybe that's something that we would want to consider in this, even if in the process that we take for what you're going to be suggesting that we do. It may be a smaller group than this.
Yes, ma'am, and that was contained in Ms. Olson's written presentation, which we received earlier as well. It was similar. Mr. Curtis had his hand up. Defer to council?
Yeah,
Okay.
at this point, but I do have some thoughts and comments that I'd like to share at some point.
We'll come back to you.
Just so I can kind of frame this, and Chris, you can jump in. Item J was designed broad enough to allow this board to give some direction on, number one, do we want to do this? Assuming that answer is yes, how do we move forward and do it? And there was talk of, engaging a facilitator like the two presenters today. There was talk about committees. I think what the staff's looking for is direction on how you might want to move forward. I have suggested these types of services I've seen engaged through an RFQ process where you would issue an RFQ to potential proposers, and they would propose, number one, their qualifications, and number two, their approach to get how they would approach it and how they would move forward. A lot of the information you saw today would probably be in these presenters' proposals. From that, you would rank those proposers. It's not based on price. You would rank those proposers, and the top ranked one, you would direct the CEO to negotiate a contract with. If you are unable to meet that, if you're unable to negotiate a contract, you'd move to the next ranked proposer. That's where I've seen it done. It's a fair process. It's open and competitive, and I think that'd be a wise way to go in this context, especially since we've already had two here have taken up their time just to make it fair for everybody.
Thank you very much. Now back to Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a terrifically important step that we're contemplating. Some may recall that some frustration I expressed during the preparation of the last strategic plan. I think what we've seen here is a good overview of what's necessary in preparing a true strategic plan for the organization. And I find myself saddened by the fact that this is my last day here, because this is a process which I was looking forward to for the last 4 years. So my hat's off to John for strongly suggesting this occur, and my hat's off to this board for hopefully undertaking this process. I think that the world has changed, and I think we need to recognize the role that this organization plays within the community on a larger basis. As has been pointed out, we started off as a fair board, recreation. I think it is worthwhile to go ahead and evaluate it. Clearly, the gaming industry has experienced a sea change, and we have to recognize that. This organization can serve as a catalyst, in my mind, to the expansion of the northern Nevada economy, and is in a unique position to do that. And this strategic planning effort, correctly performed, can help us move in that direction. So the other thing that has been pointed out, but I want to reiterate, is that this process requires strong leadership. It can't be done by a committee of good-intentioned, well-intentioned individuals without a clear focus toward getting something done. It can't be allowed to continue and perpetuate and to roll on for month after month after month. There has to be a determined focus on causing this to be completed. So, I don't know, I guess the idea of having a planning committee probably is a good one. And I think that the planning committee, the head of that planning committee, should be responsible to go ahead and push this process forward and demand of each and every board member whatever participation is necessary to go ahead and obtain the input and the outcome necessary. I'd like to suggest John Farahi act as the chairman of that committee. He has the determination, the drive, the understanding, and the strength to go ahead and cause this to occur. My one hesitation is that he's somewhat focused on gaming. On the other hand, his organization has recognized that gaming is not what it used to be and has expanded the organization in a blue ocean fashion. I applaud that. I think that's necessary, and I think that's what this organization has to do. So that reservation goes by the wayside, and I would stand by that recommendation, and I think that this organization would benefit greatly from John's leadership in pushing this organization to develop a comprehensive strategic plan based on the real-world circumstances that we're experiencing today. Thank you.
Council tells me that we're agendized for that suggestion, and sir, if you keep talking, we'll call you back from retirement and place you on that committee. Ms. Carano.
I'd like to thank the presenters. I learned a lot, and I do appreciate the time that you put in for pro bono so far. I think timetable, I think what we heard today is that planning and strategic planning goes prior to budgeting. So we're in the midst of budgeting now. So the urgency of getting this started today, I'm not sure actually works within this year's future, next year's budget. But I think the urgency of getting it going, and it could take maybe 6 months to actually come together with a 5-year plan with all the research and the stakeholders' input. I kind of disagree with just the committee getting together. I think the full board were 12, 14 people. I think retreat would be important to actually go through the process and then bring it down to a committee that would have all the players, the financial, the marketing, the facilities, and what other, I said strategic, I don't know what that one's. But anyway, so I think that timing is important, but I also think that the full board input and maybe bring in some outside input that's not on this board, maybe some other organizations. So anyway, so that's what I'm thinking. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Councilwoman Zedra.
Thank you. Really a question. I certainly hear the legal recommendation that we send out for an RFQ, without putting the presenters on the spot, there is a 50,000 expenditure level that the CEO is capable and often does in daily responsibility assume and operate from within. And anything above that comes back to the board. So kind of a two-level question, and you guys can kind of think about it. Would we be over the 50,000, do you think, if you were to work as a team on this project? And then while you're thinking about that, more specific for staff, what are the other kinds of services that you just generally reach out and hire under that 50,000 kind of threshold for operations and planning of this agency?
Well, there's quite a range. For example, it's been noted previously we're having some issues with our food service company, and we have an outside consultant who's assisted us in putting out the bid process for a new food service company, and then has assisted us in dealing with the situation we find ourselves in right now. So, I mean, that would be an example of a consultant whose specialized expertise in a specific area is employed by this organization. Doesn't happen every day, but that one immediately comes to mind because we have a meeting this afternoon with that food service company.
But would you say in the course of a year is there one, or are there 3 or 4 kinds of decisions like that you just automatically enter into?
1 or 2, perhaps. I've only been here 2 years, but I'd say probably 1 or 2 a year. I would see this as a different type of project than that because they have a rather narrow band of expertise, and this is a broader project because it touches on a whole lot of different segments and specialties.
And then for the presenters, would we be north or south of that cap?
Well, you know, until the scope of work is defined, it's hard to put a number on, you know, what the budget might be for it. But, you know, that being said, the other approach to it is taking whatever budget you're comfortable with and trying to structure the scope of services so that they fit that. My concern with, you know, the limits you've talked about is I think there may well be the need for some additional research work beyond what the planning folks would be doing, and there needs to be a provision for that. I have not worked with Erica in the past, but I liked what she had to say. I am sure that we could, you know, figure out a way to work together if you wanted us to do that to help you folks. But I would be concerned about also having a budget for undefined, because at this point, until an inventory is done of what you have, what information you have, and what you don't have and what is needed, it would be really hard to define what that might be. So I don't know what that would be, but Erica, I'll let you say.
I echo everything that Mr. Wells just said, and I think that the point that he made and I was making about how wide and how deep we go, the budget pressure comes on the external analysis and research side, and starting with what exists is the piece to that. Of course, you all have a proposal from me per what was asked before we were asked to do this today, and the variance on that is definitely on the research side. I completely agree. We could certainly work together on that. Would welcome doing so, quite frankly. And I think another thing that was really interesting that struck me as Mr. Wells was presenting was this notion of thinking about, as an organization, are we, and I don't mean these words in the way they sound, but an incremental planning process, or are we looking for a transformational planning process? Meaning, are we forwarding the current business model that we're in, or are we thinking about sort of re-looking at, and that's where that the blue ocean stuff comes in, I think, and that also has budget implications as well. So that's an interesting thing to kind of think about, and it's probably not an either or. Interesting to think about one of the business lines, but that adds an extra step to the process, quite certainly. So. That's my answer.
Councilwoman, thank you for that interesting question. Our council points out that the answer to that question is largely contained in the construction of the RFQ. To wit, we could authorize Mr. Baum $250,000 for the planning process. Of course, we do that, someone will come up and testify and say, let the thing die. Sorry. But that's a possibility.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think the most important issue is first for us to clearly define the scope. You can't ask anybody for a number till we know what the scope is. And if whatever the board decides to put the committee or the whole board, we first have to decide what that is. And to me, whether you go how deep or how shallow, that's not frankly, in my mind, the question. The question in my mind, what is going to take to get the job done? What do we need to go to get the job done? That is what the question is. So, thank you.
Mr. Curtis.
Are we under any sort of obligation to do an RFQ? Or is it simply something that, probably looks good in terms of transparency and other issues? Or what? Talk to me a little bit, help me understand what our obligations are.
Gray area on this. So the law says now anything over $50,000 must be advertised and be solicited for bids. Anything that you believe would cost $50,000 to $75,000, you can go out to 2 proposers that have expertise in that area. There is an exemption to the Purchasing Act called the Professional Services Exemption, which traditionally the Attorney General's viewed that as highly specialized technical knowledge, and they've made it akin to having a special license. So, for example, a law license or an engineering license, that type. And it's been in the services that are more intellectual in nature rather than physical or manual in nature. I believe those services, the services we're talking about today, probably do fit in that category. My concern is I don't know enough about the industry if there's a lot of others out there that think they can do the same job, and if we would be scrutinized for just talking to 2 or 1 or whatever it is. So I'm taking an excess of caution on the issue. An RFQ allows you to define the scope of services, which I think we're missing that step, as Mr. Farahi pointed out. We don't even know what the scope of services are yet. RFQ would do that. You'd get proposals back, whether it's through a new committee or one of our own committees or this whole board. You could evaluate what you get back after you define the scope of services and move on from there and rank those and figure out what the best fit of the organization is. That's kind of where I was coming from. That makes sense.
May I first enter into discussion and suggest, we got 3 electeds here. We're down to 3 so that we can replace you, sir. So we have to have the electeds. So before anybody else leaves, in shaping this, may I suggest taking into strong comments of Mr. Farahi, Ms. Carano, both. It is a board item. It is not just the CEO. I agree with Ms. Carano. I wonder if at this stage we can delegate to our staff, suggest that they construct the RFQ, bring it back, and then we go from there. Then form the committee or form the committee later, whatever we want to do. I think that would be the most productive thing for today. Does that have any resonance? Now, did you have something more, sir? Then let's go to Mr. Hall.
You took the wind out of my sails, because I think what we're talking about here are professional services. And the last thing this board wants to do is to get into a low bid environment. Right. Excuse me, I'm not finished yet. When you talk about a request for qualifications, you're not talking about coming in and giving a proposal. You're talking about qualifications. I have done this. This is my background. That's qualifications. And that, in a request for qualifications, you can make a selection based on those qualifications and nothing else. Negotiate a fee later. If you're talking about a request for proposal, different story, because there you're asking for qualifications and a scope of work, and usually with an RFP, you should give them a scope that you expect them to respond to. And I would say as well that in the case of an RFP, you can also ask for fees, but again, you need to have something in that document when you call for the proposals that says qualifications, scope, and other considerations. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be back in a low bid environment. And I don't think, I'm not going to speak for the two professionals that are here today, but I don't think you guys want to get into a low bid environment. That is not something that would serve their interests, and it's not something that's going to serve our interests. And I would prefer to have us decide what we want to do, and unfortunately, because of what has occurred in this sequence, you basically have a scope of work from M3 Planning, and you have a proposed fee from M3 Planning. That almost compromises a clear and clean RFP process, and it certainly does not rise to the level of an RFQ process. I mean, this is not, it's not something we need to deal with lightly, and I frankly am not as concerned about someone coming in and challenging what this board has done if a decision were to be made to select one or the other or to recommend that the two work together. Because what I'm hearing in the course of this discussion today is a neutral, in the first case, in the case of M3 Planning, a neutral that would lead a planning process that would require data that would need to be developed either by the stakeholders. We need to have a lot of cooperation from the stakeholders. Some independent data would need to be developed perhaps by Mr. Wells and his range of information that he has available. But there are two different approaches that I was hearing today, and I would be really concerned if we got to a point where we say, well, we're just going to do an RFP and we're going to take the low bid, and just in the interest of transparency, because this board has got some significant responsibilities that we need to exercise. And if that means that we select someone based on qualifications, we authorize our CEO to negotiate a fee, I'm good with that. I'm okay with that. And I think that's been done, I don't want to say routinely, but it's a process that works in local government. It's a process that can be used effectively. And I suspect that even in the private sector, thinking the hotel casino business, you guys probably get into situations where you select someone based on what you think is their qualifications. You have them give you a scope of work, you negotiate a fee with them, and you go to town to get the work done. I mean, I think that's done regularly and routinely. So I'm not as concerned as counsel, but I'm not being paid to put legal opinions either. I'm just basing it on a lot of experience that I've had over the years.
Anyone else? Mr. Fry.
The job of a council is to throw as many barriers in front of business to get the job done. That's their job. I have the same thing at our organization. Cannot be done. I said, tell me how can we get it done? Don't tell me how. I'm giving you a hard time, but.
Mr. Curtis.
Well, I'll just tell you what I'd do if I was running the organization. So I can do that because I'm leaving. I would establish a $50,000 budget for us to go ahead and do the strategic plan, to perform the strategic planning process, with a full recognition that another chunk of dough has to be set aside for research. And we don't know what the research is just yet. It has to do with all the other stakeholders' involvement, so on and so forth. Then I'd go ahead and hire both of them. And then I'd go ahead and set up a planning commission or a planning committee within our organization, and I'd have John run it. That's what I'd do.
Anybody like the idea of directing our staff to shape the RFQ based on the consensus of discussion and the very fine presentations we've had here today?
maybe there's, Mr. Chair, maybe there's a middle point from the recommendations that we heard from Mr. Curtis. Maybe the direction is that we have the CEO move forward with the assistance and representation from our board of Mr. Farahi of formulating an RFQ for these services. Would that be halfway there, Mr. Curtis?
RFQ or RFP?
To the direction, no problem. The direction would be for this committee to give direction to the CEO to team up with a representative from our board, that being Mr. Farahi, to write an RFQ for these services. Is it an RFQ or an RFP? I think we heard RFQ. I believe that's adequate.
To enter into the discussion, I heard counsel when he was describing the RFQ process. This is the only way I disagree with what Mr. Curtis said, naming the dollar figure. That was clearly subject to negotiation. Look at the qualifications and then negotiate. I think that's the hallmark of the RFQ process. If I could suggest, if that was a motion, I would only add someone like Ms. Carano to Mr. Farahi to consult with the CEO in that shaping process. And are we getting close to a motion, Mr. Farahi?
Mr. Chair, I really think we need to hear from Chris. We can't just, I mean, if he's running the show, we can't just say this is what we want to do. I get very upset when our board, without getting my input, decides to do things. And I say, we need your input, Chris. How you think we can get this job done? Now, the board has heard extensively how you do this planning. We know we had a great one in 2007. We have a 13 that we can look at as a base. So I would like to ask how you see it needs to be done.
Well, I think that the RFQ approach does make sense. I think we've determined there are several companies out there that we have some familiarity with who seem to have the capabilities. I think we need to define that more specifically and give everyone a chance to respond on an equal basis. And then myself and our staff stand ready to guide the process and work with this board to get the maximum effect for the most appropriate budget. I do think that the amount will be considerably above $50,000 based upon my experience. I do know that based on some of the research we presented on the committee level, there is a number of sources of data out there that we need to tap into, which cumulatively will be over $50,000 alone to do it properly. But this process is only worthwhile if it's done properly for the long term. And I think that for an organization our size, I think realistically we're talking about a budget of over $100,000 to do this the right way. And we will certainly do that as economically as possible, but I think that's the reality of what we know thus far and what many of our experiences have proved, including recent projects done in the community with other organizations that have some similarities to ours.
Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that the matter be referred back to staff for development of an RFQ in an appropriate fashion. Bring that the results of that RFQ and consultant evaluation back to the board for final selection.
There's a motion by Mr. Hall, second by Ms. Carano. Any discussion of that motion? I think we've had the discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Way to go, Curtis. Good. Anything else on item J? All right. Then we have the, can we go to item M and do the appointments first? Both appointments require electeds,
Just M.
just the M. May we entertain item M?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under this tab, you have a letter from the Chamber. This is the general business appointment to our board. This is, as everyone knows, this is Mr. Curtis's last day. This appointment would be effective March 1, and they are recommending a nomination of Dennis McGovern, and he is with the Legends Project in Sparks. And again, everyone can discuss this appointment, but only our 3 electeds left can make a motion to vote on it. And this is for a 2-year term beginning March 1.
Thank you. Is there discussion of the recommended appointment by the Chamber of the Business representative? Any discussion? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the recommendation from the Chamber to appoint Mr. McGovern for the 2-year term as our business representative.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Motion by Councilwoman Zadra, second by Commissioner Weber. Any discussion of that motion? And this is electeds holding the vote. See no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Shall we return to L now? Item L.
The United States Travel Association is the lead organization that champions many of the issues that are important to the travel industry, and we are currently participating in the International Powwow, or IPW as it's now commonly called, as an exhibitor, and we certainly support the efforts that this organization puts forth in areas like not penalizing resort destinations when it comes to government meetings and travel, a very hot topic that has hurt this destination very much in recent years. Brand USA, the marketing effort that they are a partner in that puts the U.S. tourism brand out in front of potential visitors from around the world in key markets, and the importance of meetings in general to the economy and making sure that the federal government realizes that the meetings industry and the tourism industry are among the very largest in our country in terms of employment and economic impact. So we certainly support and dovetail nicely with all the key focuses that USTA has championed in recent years. There is an organization within USTA called the Chairman's Circle, and it's specifically for destination marketing organizations like the RSCVA. And they have 40 organizations who have stepped up to be a part of the Chairman's Circle, which includes an appointment to their U.S. Travel Board of Directors. There are 3 major destinations in the tourism field that they have targeted as not being currently active with them at this level, and Reno Tahoe is one of those. Roger Dow, their president and CEO, is the former vice president of Marriott Sales for many years. I've known Roger since the 1980s, and he's done a terrific job of reinvigorating U.S. Travel Association. And they have reached out in the past to the RSCVA without success. But recently, their vice president of partnerships flew out to Reno and met with me and asked that we consider stepping up and joining our peers at USTA at this senior level. It's important to note that we currently spend a good amount of money with USTA on that IPW trade show, which is for all the inbound markets for the United States. And we will be there once again in Chicago this year. We were there in Las Vegas last year, and many of our partners come along with us. The Airport Authority just indicated they'd like to join us this year in Chicago, which will be the first time they have done that. So it's a strong team effort. But I believe we're a little bit taking advantage of the organization and not supporting it in the way we need to. We obviously have many challenges on accommodating all the different programs that cost substantial amounts of money. We're spending about $20,000 this year to be at the IPW conference. Part of that expense is included in the membership to become part of the Chairman's Circle. I do believe that as we have a higher profile in the travel industry, we need to join with all of our competitors in being more hands-on and participating. My peer down in Las Vegas. Rossi Rollencotter actually chaired U.S. Travel Association for the year of 2013 and was very active. And I think that with him chairing and us not being a member at the same level as other DMOs, the time has come for us to step up. So the good news is that although we have a roughly $33 million budget, they are very much cognizant of the fact that we own and operate facilities and most of our competitors do not. And so they asked us to basically carve out the portion of our budget that really is comparable to what other DMOs spend in the marketplace. And when you do that, out of our $33 million, about $8.2 million is the marketing and sales, programs and staffing, and our administrative portion of it. So if we were to give away or sell all of our facilities tomorrow, about $8.2 million is the comparable amount that our competition would spend on like services and activities. That qualifies us at the lowest level of membership, which is still $51,750 annually. As I noted, part of that would be reduced by the fact we wouldn't be paying a duplicate for the attendance at the powwow and at least one of our booths, or a discount on the 2 booths we currently are utilizing at powwow. So the net expense to us would be more in lines of about $30,000 a year. But we'd be attending their boards, we'd be part of the dialogue about their priorities on behalf of travel for the United States of America, and it would be my recommendation that we do step up and join our peers at this level with USTA. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion. Mr. Curtis.
I think it's a great idea. I'd like to see if we could postpone that step until maybe a year from now, once the strategic plan has been completed, once we understand what our next year's budget's going to be. It's easy to just go ahead and spend money, and which, you know, moving 25,000 here and there and back and forth. I don't disagree with the notion. I think at this particular point in time, it might be a precipitous decision. That's my thought.
Mr. Farahi.
Chair, again, we have limited resources. I think we need to find out where we get the biggest bang for those dollars. And I think it's a good idea long-term, Chris. I just don't know. I'd rather take that $30,000 if you don't have the money and put it toward getting that plan done and do it well than put it here. Even though it's important, I think it's more important to do the planning. And we don't know exactly how much it's going to take. And as you said, it's probably going to take much more than $50,000. I agree with you 100%. So I want to put our resources and time, get this job done. And once we have the plan, then be able to decide how much resources we have to put it where.
Additional discussion? There was, we can do a motion or we can do no motion. Mr. Curtis, did your suggestion rise to the level of a motion? I don't believe we do. Okay. Consensus of discussion seemed to be let's defer. Not reject, but defer decision.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That would take us to item N, November.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under this tab, you have a letter from Mayor Martini. This is the committee that was a result of AB 205 and then the renewal bill, SB 509, the last session. This is a 2.5% tax in Sparks that goes, the proceeds go to the improvements in Victorian Square to drive tourism. Sparks is looking to revitalize the Revitalization Steering Committee. So they're asking, under the bill, there's 2 appointments that come from the RCVA, and this is a full board approval. One is a member of the NRA who represents properties outside of Sparks. and the other is one who must represent the interest of Reno, Sparks, Washoe County, the motel industry, or general business. So those are the two parameters of the appointments. Historically, and Charlotte, jump in here if I'm getting this wrong, historically, we've had, I think, a couple rounds of appointments on this. They all came from our board, but it is not required that the folks come from our board. I just want to point that out. Sparks pointed that out to us. But historically, this board has appointed two of its own members to this committee under those two parameters I just gave. So it's up for discussion. And then Charlotte, did they need this to happen this month? Is there a time frame on this? Okay. I guess we're looking for volunteers.
I saw a lot of correspondence from Charlotte back and forth to the Sparks people, and I appreciate that the presentation, because the correspondence made my head hurt. I still don't know if I understand this, but I understand it better now. You want to do this today? Want to defer it? Board or outside the board? I guess those are the two questions.
Well, I'm thinking that we seem to have lost our steam of the board thinking today, and there's reason for it, because I know we're all looking at our watches. I guess for me to make a better decision, I'd like to understand a little bit more about where they're trying to go and what their vision is, so that we can make a better appointment for them, and even hear from them who their members are and how we can assist.
That's a great idea.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Weber.
Thank you so much. Since our Sparks representative is not here, I think it would be fair to wait until the next month and maybe have them have the opportunity to speak early on in the agenda.
All right. Without objection, it's like that other issue. I don't think we need a motion. But there's a consensus to revisit this and do our duty and invite Sparks. Commissioner, was that a specific invitation to Sparks staff or persons other than the Councilman Kerrigan? Okay. Staff can consider that. Okay. So I don't hear a motion, so that takes care of N, November. I tried to do the consent agenda mistakenly about 2 hours ago. Item 7, items for board consent. Do you want full board presentations? You want one consent vote? You want to pull separate items out?
One consent on the rest, Michelle.
We'll take that as a motion.
Yes, sir.
There is a motion and a second by Mr. Hall over here. Okay? Any discussion of the consent items? Yes, sir.
Item F, the cost of the sound system, the RFP, rather, regarding the digital sound system at the Reno Sparks Convention. Oh, boy, is that convention? Was that for the Livestock Event Center, or was that for the Convention Center?
No, sir, we did the Livestock Event Center last year. This is actually for our Convention Center.
Okay. I guess my biggest question is, there was a base price. What's not in the price? I mean, I think we went over some of this discussion with other projects, that everything wasn't included in the estimates given. And this specifically says base price from these two bidders. What is included, I guess, and what is not included? Or what, do we know what kind of other costs are going to be outside?
In this case, this base bid, there was no options A or B, so it was truly just quote replacement, take the existing equipment out and put the new equipment in. There's really very little cabling. It's put it in,
foreseeing of a lot of extra costs.
There's no additional engineering fees, design costs, or anything in this at this point.
No, sir, and we're not, obviously, we don't foresee any change orders of any, it's, quite honestly, it's not a huge project, what we're doing. We do have the representative from the company and our staff, but it's not a huge project.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional discussion on consent items? Mr. Curtis?
Notice how I'm pressing that button every time. I mean, that's the first time. Just a couple of thoughts. Number one, I'm not a member of the marketing committee. I don't go to that meeting. I know I can, but I haven't. But I get these reports every month, and I just continue to note that there's a disconnect between our goals and what we're accomplishing. And I got to ask the question one more time. Is it the goals that are the problem, or do we have a different problem? Maybe somebody from the marketing committee can just help me understand. Is it the goals, or is it us?
Mr. Baum?
Well, if I may, the irony is that the good news is that our definite bookings, including those that are committed to us and are still in the process of being signed, are now 100% year-to-date goal. So as we've rebuilt the sales team and people have had more tenure and our messaging has been stronger in the meeting convention marketplace, we are finally at the point where year-to-date we're at 100% of what our goal is. The challenge is, and we just had a meeting with our directors of sales yesterday, our individual hotels are finding a challenge of getting those contracts signed on a timely basis. But in terms of the commitments, definite, we've chosen Reno, Tahoe, Sparks, whatever, we are 100% year-to-date. That doesn't mean that challenges don't exist in the future. It's an extremely competitive marketplace, as Mr. Farahi noted earlier. Our hotel sales teams, for the individual work they do for their own properties, are having a tough time making their goals. But we are all working together, and we have made a lot of progress.
Great question. Any other discussion? Ms. Grano?
I'm interested in hearing more about the Bowling Congress amendment. That was a complicated contract, and I was just hoping that there might be some sort of presentation. So maybe, do we take that out of the consent items, or do we just ask for discussion?
It's appropriate discussion under the motion that's on the floor. Mr. Curtis, can you give some report?
You said Mr. Curtis.
Mr. Kelly, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mr. Kelly will give you an update.
Sorry.
Certainly, I will. Under the terms of the agreement that we currently have, we have a base price, our base site fee, if you will, of $1.8 million, and there is an incentive clause based on trackable room nights that USBC has to hit. It's been determined that that's not the best metric or for determining their site fee. They suffered a large penalty last year because people are not using their housing authority. And so basically our site fee last year was $960,000 for both the Open and the Women's Championships. In working with our partner properties and USBC, we've determined that a more appropriate way would be to audit each bowler in the squad room prior to the team event, determine where they will stay, or where they're staying, and then we will determine, and then the site fee, that the RSCVA will pay 70% of the site fee based on $20 a bowler. The RSCVA will pay 70%, the hotels will pay 30%, and the hotel's 30% will be based on where the individual bowlers stayed, not necessarily how they arose or how they came to the conclusion of where they stayed. Regardless of whether they're here on a casino promotion, Expedia, whether they called direct or they went through the housing authority is not relevant to the agreement now, which it was initially. So now we will audit prior to the team event. And if that makes sense, in a nutshell, we will pay, the RSCVA will pay $20 per bowler, assuming, and then we will audit each bowler as to where they're staying, And the RSCVA will pay 70% of the site fee, the hotels will pay 30%. And we will audit, regardless of how they arrive at that hotel, the hotels will pay based on that, on their occupancy.
Is it per room? Because sometimes, or are
No,
you asking
it's
them?
per bowler.
Per bowler.
Per
Okay.
bowler. So if you and Mrs. Adger were here at the women's tournament and staying together, the hotel would have to pay on 2 bowlers and no longer on the room count.
Mr. Hawkins.
And those terms can be reviewed and changed after a 1-year period, right?
Well, yes, this is only for 2014. The site fees for 15, 16, and 18 are already set. They're flat fees. But then going forward from 19 through 30, we're going to have to review because those actually are set up based on trackable room nights. Hopefully by 19 through 30, we're doing more of a stay and play or stay and save type of a program. But yes, sir, this is strictly for 2014.
Any other discussion of the consent items? Motion. Mr. Curtis.
Just one small topic with regard to the sound system. At the Finance Committee meeting, I had requested that when capital improvements are presented to the board, that they be done in conjunction with a evaluation of the reserve study that you prepared so well, so that we can continue to understand where we are relative to the facilities. With the strategic planning process underway, I expect that facilities will be addressed, but I'd like to suggest to this board as an ongoing process that whenever capital improvements are requested or purchased, that request come in conjunction with a revisiting of the reserve study so that we understand the impact that expenditure is going to have on our reserve analysis. Thank you.
That cost was added to this, Mr. Curtis, and the projected cost was $88,325, so we're about $1,500 above what we had projected for that. And we will update accordingly the remaining life and replacement of that on this study.
And share with the board. It's good to have it in front of us.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on the consent items? All right, then on the motion, all those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Then I believe that would take us to items for future board meetings. Anyone have such items? Staff? Sir?
Just an observation, we did not cover the president's report, which is fine, but that was one item that we skipped past, so.
I apologize for that.
Well,
is that an offer to stand on your written report, or do you wish to supplement that?
whatever the board would like me to do, I can give a brief report or no report. You've all received the written document.
I know Mr. Curtis will stay until you know, our key votes have taken place, and you know, your reports are they're important to us and good information. Your choice, sir, if you wish to.
Let me give the 2-minute version, if I may, just to reinforce some very important things that have happened since we last met. One of the most important things we do in terms of setting the tone for our messaging with meeting and convention planners is a 16-page insert that runs in the top 2 magazines in the meeting and convention field. And we have an ongoing advertising campaign that everyone knows here that is upfront and very aggressive. But this 16-page piece is really our opportunity each year to fine-tune the messaging we want meeting and convention planners and decision makers to be aware of for our destination. And the great thing about this is the kind of support we have from our hotel community. The Atlantis, J.A. Nugget, Grand Sierra, Silver Legacy, Peppermill, Hyatt Lake Tahoe, Harrah's have joined the RSCVA once again, running advertising this piece that allows it to be 16 pages long. It is magna stripped and can be removed from the magazine. We print 15,000 of them and use them at trade shows, sales calls, presentations. We went through all of them last year. They were so popular. This is an important part of the messaging we have out there, and it's very cost effective for us. So I don't have those yet because they're literally at the printers right now, but at our next board meeting, I'll bring copies for all of you, and I think we'll be very proud the way our destination is presented in this very high-profile format. 50,000 circulation meetings and conventions, 50,000 successful meetings. We also have our consumer marketing campaign just getting going now in our #1 market of Northern California. $1.25 million this year, up significantly from last year. The reason for that is that 4 of our properties have stepped up and partnered with us, putting an additional $500,000 in on top of the $750,000 budgeted by the RSCVA. So outdoor, magazine, radio, online, and this is the campaign that for the last 2 years has increased visitation to our website from Northern California by 50% each year, versus less than 25% nationwide for our online marketing effort. So we know this works. We're speaking with a louder voice this year with our partners, and we will be able to show you the new creative at our next meeting, but I think you'll be very pleased with that as well, because it really does a great job of presenting the variety of things to do and see and enjoy in Northern Nevada to our #1 market. 2 other things. I chair the Regional Marketing Committee, which is the group that for over 10 years has put funds together to help us market and support existing and future air service. This group is aware of a number of projects we've been working on, but when I took over as chair last summer, I believed that the way that the organization was set up was more representative of the way the airline industry used to be and not the current marketplace. So I proposed a number of significant changes. They are outlined in my report. I won't go through them. We'll be having a meeting in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll have approval to make this a leaner and more relevant organization going forward, so that as we work with the airport authority and the local corporate community now, as well as the tourism community, will be more able to respond to the needs of a very dramatically changed airline industry and get new and support existing service. This is the only fund that's available to go for this effort. There are other discussions about maybe the state stepping up and putting some dollars apart, but that is in the future. Right now, the $600,000 or so that we have available are the only funds that can be moved quickly in support of air service needs. And then finally, in a few hours from now, we'll be sitting down with the Chief Operating Officer and several other officers of Levy Restaurants to address the legal document that was shared with them at their corporate headquarters in Chicago. We definitely got their attention. They did a tasting for us this week that went very well. They have a new chef, a new director of operations. I think we have new awareness at the corporate level. There are some things that need to approve, but I will give you an update on that meeting this afternoon. But so far, I think they've been quite responsive to our concerns, and we're looking forward to improved service and for all these issues to go away in the future. That is my abbreviated report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the president? Any comments? All. Motion to approve the report and a second. Any discussion of that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. And so now we would go to items for future board meetings. Does our staff have any at this time? Do you suggest any?
So we get an update on the strategic planning process.
Okay. Members. Might have to ask council if Mr. Curtis can offer an item and then depart. Don't want to give him any ideas. Okay, I see none, so we'll pass by that one without any motion. Board member comments.
I'll make
Mr.
a comment.
Curtis.
I just want to thank everybody here for putting up with me. You don't have to worry about me running for any other political offices. This has been a interesting and educational experience for me. I wish you the best of luck. If I can do anything to help, let me know. Love to stay in touch with everybody. Good luck. Thanks.
Mr. Curtis, I think I speak for the entire board. You were often to raise your hand, but it was always quality input. It was. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Any other? Any other board member comments? All right, then let us go to Final public comment. All right, we'll close out final public comment, and let's say that without objection, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.